Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Greg Tuppo from the 74 Million. Glad to be here with you all. Um, Looking forward to a really deep, wonderful conversation. We are quickly approaching what historians are calling America's semi-quincentennial. Repeat that. It's 250th anniversary. And it shocks me each time I say it, but as I sit here, I am old enough to have remembered the bicentennial in 1976. And Rick, I think you and I are about the same age. I was in middle school, but I do remember the country being in what felt like a more celebratory mood. There was a presidential election happening. There were tall ships in New York Harbor where I grew up. I remember the bicentennial minutes on TV. The tagline is still burned in my memory 200 years ago today. I don't know if you remember those. You can still find a few on YouTube for the kids out there. Um, it felt like people were coming together to take stock and celebrate our history in a way that feels like we're somehow unable to do now. And that's one of the things I think we want to talk about. Obviously, we had in 1976 plenty to disagree about. We were just 8 years removed from 1968. We were just 2 years past Watergate, still in the thick of the fight for civil rights. And of course, Vietnam was fresh in everyone's mind. So I don't want to sugarcoat it, but it seemed like we had an ability to come together. And I wonder if we've lost that. If we look at historical knowledge and political sophistication, I think something essential is changing in 2026. If we look at some recent surveys, just 47% of adults could correctly identify why the original 13 colonies declared independence from Britain in 1776. And then another survey of Gen Z, sorry, Leaf, the Gen Z are on this panel. Um, Researchers at Tufts University found that Gen Zers hold kind of troubling attitudes about democracy. Nearly 1 in 3 displayed what they call dismissive detachment to democracy with low confidence in our governing system and higher than average support for, wait for it, authoritarianism. Nearly two-thirds displayed a passive appreciation, in their words, for democracy, saying they trusted government but were complacent about politics. And so, the youngest Gen Zers are in high school and college now, so we have a lot of work to do in our education system. So today we're asking, how should educators teach America's story? How should educators teach America's story? And just a bit of housekeeping, we will leave plenty of time for questions, so you can submit them in writing in the chat, and we will get to as many of them as we can, probably near the bottom of the hour. I want to let the panelists introduce themselves, but I want to do it in a different kind of way. I want to do it by asking them to think out loud about a question, and they have not heard this question yet. So it's this. As July 4th, 2026 nears, how are you feeling about our ability to come together and celebrate our founding? Celebrate it, have a civil conversation about it. So let's introduce yourselves and let's assign a number. Let's say 1 through 10. Okay, so tell us who you are, where you're from, and give us a score. Okay, and don't be afraid to give us a tough score. Um, let's start with Carolyn.
Right. So I'm Carolyn Lavander. I'm a Carlson Professor of Humanities at Rice University, Vice President for Global Strategy at Rice University as well, author most recently of Invent Ed, How an American Tradition of Innovation Can Transform College Today. And Greg, I'm assuming that 10 is the most coming together and 1 is the
Yeah,
least. Just
sorry.
getting your numbers right.
Should
Yeah.
should should have clarified. 10 is the
Yeah.
best.
All right, all right. Just wanted to be clear on that. And so, look, I would say it depends what you mean by coming together, but I would put us at a 7 or 8. I'm a little
Yeah,
more optimistic than I think you are, with the caveat that when we talk about coming together, we're talking about leveraging all kinds of technology tools, digital tools. It's not necessarily the case that coming together equals consensus, right? So,
yeah.
but I do think that at such a propitious moment in our history as a country, that there will be an acceleration of discussion around it.
Okay. Good. So we're starting out with a good score, 7 or an 8. Okay. At least we can come together. We may not agree.
Right.
Let's go to Leaf.
Yeah, I'm Leaf Lin. I'm a policy analyst at the Progressive Policy Institute, and I work with Rick on the American Identity Project. And Carolyn kind of stole my answer, but I'm also of the
Huh.
7 to 8,
Oh, okay.
cautiously optimistic side of things.
Okay.
Believe that there will be a lot, I think leading into it, there will be a lot of discussion. And of course there will always be people who are on each side. But ultimately, I think on the day of and on that weekend, I think most of the country will come together in celebration of, our progress that we've made and the country and its history. So I'm pretty optimistic about things.
All right. Sounds good. And last but not least, Rick.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Collenberg. I'm director of the American Identity Project at the Progressive Policy Institute, and I'll give you a bifurcated score.
Okay.
So among elites, I would say a 1.
Okay.
I think elites are at each other's throats, and don't want their kids to marry someone of a different political party, all of that. Among regular people, I'd put, ordinary Americans who, are grateful for the country in many ways. I'd put that at an 8 or 9. So I
Okay.
don't know what that averages to. Let's discount the elites. Let's put it at a 10.
So we're like it. I think we're like at about an 8. I don't know, maybe an 8. If we put in the elites, we're kind of go down to a 5. Okay, so not bad. I want to like dig right in here to I think what in some way is kind of the bedrock moment here for this webinar, and that is the research, Rick, that you and Leaf have done, um, looking at the portrait that most young people end up seeing about American history. I don't want to describe it too much in detail, but it looks at something really important that I think most people aren't aware of and aren't really thinking deeply about. So if you guys can describe your research, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, I'll take a first crack at it, and then Leif, who is the co-author on the study, should go into more detail about our methodology. But we were looking at 3 years of American Quarterly, which is the flagship journal of American studies.
Mhm.
So when people think about American studies, the history, the culture, the literature of America, they might think of lay historians, people like David McCullough, people, filmmakers like Ken Burns, who give this sophisticated story that tells the good and the bad about America. And Donald Trump is, I think, trying to erase some of that negative. But what we found in American Quarterly is kind of the mirror opposite of Trump. So we examined 100 articles over a 3-year period and found that 80% were critical of America, often talking about issues like racism and sexism and homophobia. 20% were neutral.
Mhm.
We bent over backwards to find neutral ones. So if an article said America is shot through with racism, but here was an individual who fought back, we counted that as neutral because there has to be something good about America that allows dissent, allows people to fight against injustice. But what was really shocking is that we found not a single article that we could code as positive.
Mm.
So there was no articles that examined questions like why, with 4% of the population in the world, do we have 40% of the Nobel Prize winners? Why is America considered the number one destination for people across the world? There was no such curiosity about those questions. And I'll just leave you with 2 examples. One was an article which said the law of thermodynamics is, quote, an abstract settler capitalist theory that influenced the plunder of indigenous lands and lives. So That's probably not what most people think about when they think about thermodynamics, but that's what American Quarterly says. The other is the way they describe the National Football League. The article said the NFL treats players like minstrel performers, quote, required to entertain white folk while ensuring that pre-existing racial hierarchies remain unscathed. So that gives you a flavor of what we found. And Lee, maybe I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts and methodology.
Yeah, of course. So just want to clear the table and say when we say critical articles, we are looking at if the article focused on a historical or contemporary negative event, time, moment, or idea. That's what we delineated as critical, and then the opposite for positive. And for neutral, as Rick had talked about, if it has kind of a balance of good and bad, then we would count that as neutral. And so we kind of had a three-step process when we were coding these articles. The first was kind of a keyword search, and we initially pulled the words from an article that former Harvard Dean Harry Lewis had written about when he was looking at Harvard's online course catalogs. So we wanted that as a kind of a starting point. And as we read more and more articles, we kind of added words that we commonly found in the American Quarterly articles. So that was our first kind of first step. And then afterwards, we looked at each article. We read through the article, we read its abstract, and that was a second initial coding. And then the last one, the third part, was we would try to find a representative quotation for each of the articles. And of course, if you're not able to find one, then that kind of gives you a warning of, oh, perhaps I had, labeled this article incorrectly. And then lastly, in our appendix, you'll also see this, we made sure to kind of explain what we categorized what type of critique it was making on America. So for example, if the article focused on American racism, American sexism, etc. So that was kind of our three-step process.
Gotcha. And I want to just give us a bit of a kind of I'm not going to call it a reality check, but the examples you've mentioned about the NFL and thermodynamics and capitalism are shocking. But I guess I want to make sure we understand like what's at stake here with this publication to the American Quarterly. You mentioned Ken Burns and David McCullough being, having a more nuanced approach. I guess I would, just as an outsider to the history business, I would think that more people are getting their conception of American history from those guys who are balanced and nuanced and who are getting things right than American Quarterly. So just for people who don't know this publication and don't know its importance and significance, can you just kind of give us a sense of that? Why does that matter?
Yeah, well, so that's a fair question because American Quarterly is read by a limited number of individuals.
Okay.
But I think the challenge is that we see not only this this kind of imbalanced view of America found in an elite academic journal, but also in course syllabi at the college level. So there was a study recently that looked at millions of course syllabi and found that on contentious issues that far left-leaning authors were commonly assigned, and there wasn't a countervailing, even moderate writer, much less a conservative writer. So it translates into the curriculum and what people teach, because every professor who's invested a fair amount of time in writing articles wants to communicate those findings to students in some manner. And then that translates to a lesser degree, I would say, to the K through 12 level. I don't think the situation's as bad at the K through 12 level. But the bottom line is that, 1 in 4 Gen Zers would more likely identify the founders as villains than heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, there's lots of reason to think that the founders were flawed, that they were hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
But these are the people who unleashed freedom and political ideas about freedom and political equality into a constitutional democracy that is, has stood for 2 centuries and more. And to think that they are seen as villains suggests there's something going wrong in our educational system.
Okay. Carolyn, I want to get you into the mix here. And by the way, as I always say with folks in settings like this, please feel free to talk to one another, not just to me. So if you hear something you want to respond to, you do not need my permission. Carolyn, I want to get into your work. As an introduction, can you respond to what you're hearing and how that comports with what your research shows?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, let me just say language of heroes, villains, critical, negative, positive. I mean, these are all very, these are not, terms that are broadly accepted, so some people would say something's critical, others would say it's insightful, so I just want that caveat. But look, I've written, 5, 6 books on the history of race and gender and sexuality in the United States. I was, integral to the shift in American studies from a US-based field of inquiry to a transnational hemispheric model. So, I am exactly the person who would write for American Quarterly or American
Okay.
Literary History. Let me just say, I think it's easy to pull out a couple of examples out of context of things that we're all supposed to find horrible. That's kind of an easy bomb to launch. The fact of the matter is that American Quarterly is an academic journal that has been publishing since 1949. It has, let us remember, a long and storied history of publishing groundbreaking academic work. And if you look at the work in 1949 and you look at the work in 1960 and you look at the work in 1980, these are scholars who were working on discovery questions in their time. And I think one of the things, Greg, that you observed from the 1976 moment, your perspective is that it was a time of more sort of uncomplicated celebration of our country. And, if we think back 50 years ago and we think about where we are today, I mean, I would definitely say that American society is much more equitable. I think we accept people of color in ways we didn't in the 70s. We have, rights for women in the ways that we didn't in the 70s. And so we have become a much more, I would say, not to minimize, racial violence or, not to say we're perfect, but I think in that 50 years, our country has seen a lot of really important forward steps for social justice, for human rights. I think it is natural in academia, regardless of discipline or field, for the current generation to want to find the new stuff, right? And that happens in physics, that happens in electrical and computational engineering. Certainly, when I was in graduate school, the work yet to be done was very much the recovery work of women writers, for example, whose work had not stayed in publication, right? So that was a very exciting field. The assumption being rightly, I believe, that we had a better, bigger understanding of a Walt Whitman or a Herman Melville than we had of a Harriet Beecher Stowe at that point. So the reason I mention this is I think each generation picks up the work they perceive that is yet to be done. And so I approach the American Quarterly or the many decades of any academic journal with that in mind, right? What is the long view? Because after all, we are writing in our moment, but we are contributing to a corpus of knowledge that we hope will be there long after us.
Mhm.
And so, that for me is an important context when we think about the work that people are doing today. The other thing I would observe is that across disciplines, we are trained in graduate school to identify and be critical of ideas. It's sort of what we do, and we do it for a reason. We do it so that we can identify a blind spot, right? So whether you're a physicist or a geophysicist or a political scientist, you need to find a blind spot so you can have an original contribution to make to a field.
Mhm.
And so I think that habit of thought produces a kind of impulse to identify the critical
Mhm.
and document the critical.
Mhm.
And that's something that those writing for the public, Ken Burns, for example, doesn't have the same burden or onus or commitment there. I mean, certainly, right, these popular stories of our founding fathers develop very nuanced pictures of a John Adams, for example. But there's not this sense in those to only identify the areas of research still needing to be done. That work is much more, let us provide a comprehensive story of the life of Adams or Jefferson.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think there's slightly different projects, and it's important to bear that in mind.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Greg, if I can, I'll take you up on your invitation
Yeah.
to
No
jump
permission
in.
needed. Go for it.
So let me agree with much of what Carolyn just said, and then have a couple of areas of disagreement.
Yeah.
First of all, in terms of the advancement since 1976, completely agree that celebration was, in hindsight, fairly unsophisticated and didn't recognize enough of the challenges that this country has faced over the years. And so I think it is progress that we are more self-critical than we were in 1976.
Mhm.
I will also agree that critical can sometimes be insightful. When Leif and I were coding a story as critical, or an article as critical, we weren't saying it's wrong. We were just looking at the totality of the articles to see how many were critical, how many were neutral, and how many positive. And that's where the imbalance showed up. On the question of, I guess whether, well, let me make it two further points. First, I do agree that academics look for new stuff. They want to contribute something that hasn't been said already,
Mhm.
and look for blind spots. But I don't think that inexorably means that the stories have to be critical or negative about a subject. So you could be curious about something positive in America. And I think Yale University just recognized that there was imbalance at Yale, and they were being self-critical, and that led them in a different direction than kind of the unrelentingly negative view found in American Quarterly. The other piece is that I guess I take a little bit of exception to the idea that these quotes that we use from about the NFL and thermodynamics are unrepresentative and out of context. But readers can judge for themselves, because we made sure to include in the appendix the abstract of every single article and a representative quotation from each of those articles. And so I think we were certainly going in good faith, trying to get a temperature of what's in American Quarterly, but it is something that people can judge for themselves by looking at the appendix. And we're welcome for critique and people saying, well, this article should have been quoted as neutral rather than negative, and have a discussion about that. That's fair game. So far from the American Studies folks, we haven't gotten any of that, and instead they've just said we're you sounds like you're aiding and abetting Donald Trump, which we certainly aren't doing. We're critical of Donald Trump and his approach to the American story.
Yeah. So let's move forward. So like, what would be a remedy to this? The next the next issue of American Quarterly, when it hits your mailbox, what should it look like? And Carolyn, if you have things you'd like to see differently, please jump in as well. What's the what should folks like this stop doing, and what should they start doing? Taking Carolyn's insights, in keeping them in mind, which is this idea of needing to tread new ground, right? Not just present sort of the same old thing.
I mean, I'd like to see more exploration of continued exploration of our flaws, because that's important. I would hate a American Quarterly that had 100% positive stories, articles. But I think that I'd be looking for more balance, more of an interest in some of those questions I posed before. What is it about American society that has allowed for a flourishing of science and ingenuity? What is it? Given all the admitted flaws of this country, why is it that people want to come here? And I think some of the, if you look at polling, immigrants are the most patriotic Americans of all, because they know something different. So kind of, people often say they only know what it's, they only really realize how American they are until they travel abroad, because you start to appreciate what's different and what's distinctive about America. And so I would hope that American Quarterly would include some of those questions as well.
Okay, Carolyn, you want to offer?
Well, first, I'd like to just sort of broadly say, as an American Studies scholar, I'm delighted that an academic journal like American Quarterly is the object of such sustained research interest, right? So I think actually often academics, we worry, we're writing, nobody reads our articles, nobody cares. So, I mean, it's great attention, right? And if all publicity is good publicity, bring it on.
Yeah.
So in that way, I think it's terrific. I mean, as we were chatting earlier, there is in the popular press, in the Times and the Economist and any kind of journal or publication, regardless if it's perceived to be left, right, or center, there is an impulse to report on the negative, right? That's kind of for whatever reason, that is a human trait across different kinds of writing and for different kinds of readers. And so I think that's important to remember, that there is something about the sensational press, and that actually is something that's very much part of American culture, the rise of the sensational press, right? So I think there are other contexts here that are important to remember as we're having this discussion, which some people could say is rather esoteric. Well, here's this academic journal, I've never heard of it before, why are we caring so much about it? My positive takeaways, maybe I'm just a positive person, are it's great to have this kind of debate about an academic journal. And we need to also remember the larger context of an American readership or a global readership and the history of print culture in the United States.
I want to broaden the discussion from the findings and from the journal, but I do want to jump in with one question from the viewers. And again, for those of you watching, like I said, drop your questions into the chat, and we will pose them to the panelists. So the first question is from Robert Moss. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Robert. And he writes, the bias in the topic selection is nicely demonstrated in your study. How was the scholarship? Great question. Was the bias solely in the choice of topic, or was it also in the conclusions reached? Really interesting question. We talk all the time in the media about, story selection, right? It says as much about your publication what you want to write about as in how you write about it, right? Can you talk about that, Leif and Rick?
So could you just say that first part of the question again? I
Sure,
know
no
the
problem.
second part.
Sure, I'll repeat it. The bias in the topic selection is nicely demonstrated in your study. How was the scholarship? Was the bias solely in the choice of topic, or was it also in the conclusions reached?
I think the choice of topic, in my opinion, is fine. Because again, we can explore various different things about American history. There's so much to look at. I think it's mostly about how they write about it and the kind of language that they use. I feel that oftentimes there is kind of an undercurrent of the idea that American civilization itself is built upon kind of these fundamental flaws, and that we have to kind of tear everything down in order to rebuild something better. And to me, I think that's kind of a more extreme view, and I would think that's something where we accept that we have many flaws and that we have a history of failing to meet our ideals, but that, we make progression and we should keep on fighting for a more egalitarian society. But, not that America is built and fundamentally flawed so much that we need to kind of destroy everything. So I think it's mostly about how they write about it
Okay.
and not about, topics of choice. I think topics of choice, you can choose many. So.
Yeah, I mean, and in some ways it's both. It's the choice of topic, but then also the way that the authors wrote about it was really kind of there was a monoculture that was unceasingly critical and negative about America. And again, just to reiterate, there's plenty that's valid in that. But there was just a huge imbalance. If you wanted to analogize to kind of the more popular accounts of history, it would, to my mind, there was a lot of echo of the 1619 Project. There are, I read the whole book, the 1619 Project, and I thought there were interesting things. I learned certain things from it. It was a serious effort. At the same time, it was completely imbalanced and was written with a policy objective. I mean, the author, Nicole Hannah-Jones, said, if by the end of this book, if you're not for cash reparations for Black people, you haven't understood what we've been getting at. So it was a potted history that had a certain public policy goal, and I think they're analogies to what we found in American Quarterly in the 1619 Project.
Okay. You make me think of this kind of idea in journalism. Sometimes people say we don't write for our readers, we write for our competition. That is, we write so the guy at the other publication will say, wow, look at that, look at that. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about here? I mean, you mentioned 1619. Are people sort of gravitating towards something they think is going to impress their colleagues or their next boss, or
Well, I'll say really quickly, and then Carolyn, you're in the field, so you
Carolyn's in the actual
comment. But I'll just say that clearly, the way you get tenure is to write for these publications. Only 4% of articles are accepted in American Quarterly. So if you want to advance career-wise, you need to try to place your articles in places like American Quarterly. And if I were a young academic and I saw what was in the American Quarterly, here are the things that get accepted, I would take a powerful signal from that.
Okay. Um,
Rick, I think you
yeah,
make
go
a
ahead.
very important point, which is, just how competitive it is to get published in these journals.
Mhm.
And so, getting back to the, more positive, focus of an article, the editorial boards, have these crazy difficult decisions to make.
Yeah.
And so when push comes to shove, it may be that a more enhanced argument uh, is more memorable, right? In a way for review boards and outside readers. But I think, Rick, you make the really important point that these scholars are working in a uh, author environment that is much more competitive than it was, in the 1950s when the quarterly was really young. There are just more academics out there. The journals have not expanded according to the growth in academics. And so it is a very tough environment. It
Yeah.
really is important to remember. Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit and ask about something Rick said a minute ago. Rick, your criticism was this idea that like history, or at least the kind of history you read in publications like American Quarterly, they don't address this obvious question of like, wait a minute, why do people want to come to America? Like, what is it about us that people understand at a very deep level, but that historians aren't writing about? And I guess, part of me wonders whether that's not history's job. That's more like art and music and theater and poetry's job, right? To talk about uh, those things. I want to
Well,
just throw that out to folks.
yeah, I mean, American studies is supposed to encompass much more than American history. It is art and literature and American culture. Um, I mean, these to me are fascinating questions. Why is American pop culture so dominant in the world? What's going on there? But these are the types of issues that don't get raised in American studies, at least that don't make it into. Maybe lots of great people are writing about it, but they didn't make it into American Quarterly.
Mhm. Okay,
Um,
go
I just
ahead.
want to pop in real quick, because it kind of fits into this conversation. But when the president of American Studies Association responded to us through the Chronicle, he said that, American Studies is this vast field, and it looks different at different institutions. And so there might be ones where, we might think there are more positive articles, and then there are ones that, like American Quarterly, we think are more negative. And so I think even with, the idea that, we're taught to be more critical of things in academia and to kind of find kind of new inroads, I think there is a place for kind of balance and both sides to be presented fairly.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, you know, I'm not sure if we can escape from this hour without talking about our president, and the challenges that his point of view presents. Um, there's a way in which, if we had been talking about this 3 or 4 years ago, with a Democrat in the White House, I think it would have felt a little different. But my sense is that a lot of folks in academia, a lot of folks in education writ large, are pushing against that wall. I think that they see this idea that, and the president has even come out and said it, that, young people are taught to hate their country, right? Um, the, do we do we foresee, um, you know, uh, 2028 is coming soon, um, and this, barring something quite remarkable, this person isn't going to be in the White House. Do we foresee the tone changing? Do we foresee people thinking differently about this question that Rick is posing? That the idea of like, is our monoculture going to, suddenly start to be less of a monoculture.
Well, I mean, I would hope so. You know, Donald Trump is going into national parks and asking people to take down signs about enslavement of Black people.
Right.
I mean, that's a horrendous thing to do. And so it's natural for academia to respond. And I will point out that our analysis was from 2022 to 2024.
Yeah.
Joe Biden was president. So this wasn't a reaction to Trump, at least during those years. I think it's something more endemic. But there are two reasons I have some hope for the future. One is I think when Trump leaves the scene, that there will be less polarization. I hope, and therefore that you'll see more of kind of the reaction that Yale University had, introspection, and saying, well, maybe we got some things wrong. In their recent report, they said that academia has lost trust, that the universities have lost trust, and there's a reason for that. They weren't defensive, so maybe there'll be more of that once Donald Trump leaves the scene.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that gives me some hope is I think out of the tragedy of October 7th came a recognition that there was something deeply wrong in the academy, and I'm talking about the day or two after the slaughter of Jews in Israel. You had all sorts of groups say that Israel was to blame for this, and that in essence it mattered who does the raping. Right, it's the identity of the rapist matters, as to whether this is a bad thing or a good thing. And I think people said, what on earth is going on? Yep. And so there's been a level of introspection, at least among trustees and among some university presidents, that I think can actually really flourish after Trump leaves the scene. And so I, for those reasons, I'm hopeful for a better future.
Okay.
I mean,
Carolyn, go ahead.
I would observe that the timeline for an article to actually be published is a number of years. So from the moment that a scholar finishes the article, it goes through a review process that can last a year, then revisions, and then it's in a queue. So actually, the timeline, it sounds like that you were looking at an American Quarterly, coincides with Trump's first term in office, right?
Yeah.
So we were probably seeing a moment of scholarship that was occurring in that first term. I think that's an important thing to remember, that lag.
Yeah.
Look, if nothing else, I think this second term surely has awakened profound questions in this country about the democratic process, about representative government, the consent of the governed, I think is certainly something. These are, this is the wheelhouse of American Studies faculty members. And so I would certainly hope that coming out of this, it's almost like we've gone to boot camp in American democratic, the term crisis is used too often, but I mean, this has definitely been a leadership crisis in our country now, that has, little chance, it seems to me, of changing in the immediate coming months for sure. And so my hope for scholarship in American Quarterly or wherever you would find it would be that this would really be a call to action for this generation of faculty and scholars to really dig down on the deep tissue of our democratic culture and processes.
I mean, this is not nearly comparable, but I often say that, Trump did something wonderful for civics, and that everybody knows who the Commerce Secretary is now, right? I mean, I'll tell a story of when in 2017, when Trump was first elected, I told my daughter I had been covering Betsy DeVos's Senate hearing to be the education secretary. And she was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're going to make this woman secretary of education. And I said, I admire your, your point of view. I said, but can you name any secretary of education in the history of our country? And she didn't know who the previous ones were. So good, we're getting a little bit of an immune response, I guess. I want to offer, and by the way, we have about 12 more minutes. So folks watching, you still have time to pose a question in the chat. The field is open here. There's not a big long queue. So if you have a question, don't be bashful, pose it, and we'll get it to the panelists. I want to offer, I don't know, kind of like a wobbly counterfactual here, especially to Rick. In 2021, if you had polled the folks who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, I think they would have said, man, America's an amazing country, right? My ancestors came here for the reasons that Rick is talking about, right? They get it, yet there they were, smashing windows and invading the Capitol. Help me out of that quandary.
Well, I think what we're looking for with the American Identity Project is reflective patriotism that de Tocqueville talked about. So it's not a knee-jerk patriotism that says America right or wrong. I believe in everything that the president at the time is doing. None of that is what we're seeking. It's rather reflecting on some of the phenomenal accomplishments of the founders, recognizing that they themselves violated many of the ideas around freedom and equality that they were articulating, but also recognizing that the original ideas found in the Declaration of Independence provided the predicate for the abolition movement, for Dr. King and the civil rights movement, for women's rights. And so that in fact, the democracy is self-correcting. That's the type of patriotism we're interested in. I mean, I think the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th were deeply unpatriotic. They were seeking to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. They were attacking the citadel of democracy, and they were doing it while many of them were waving Confederate flags, the flags of those who were traitorous to the country. So they may say they're patriotic and believe in America, but they don't believe in the ideals of America that bind us together. So that's what I'm looking for, is that reflective patriotism rather than a knee-jerk patriotism.
Okay, excellent. Oh, we do have a couple more questions. Fabulous. We've got a question from Joseph Garcia, who asks, and can you folks see do you have access to the Q&A as well, or is it just me?
Yes.
Okay.
I can
I'm going to read Joseph's question out loud. So this is, he's asking, please address the lack of civic participation that Putnam writes about in Bowling Alone, and why we got to where we are with low voter turnout, participation in running for office, and what the Powell Memo and Samuel Huntington's Crisis of Democracy set up and was carried out to remove people from themselves, their communities, and the country. Civic participation is at an all-time low, much like our life expectancy. Interesting point. Let's talk about civic participation. Do you feel like that's a result of the things we're talking about? Is it in spite of it?
I don't.
Oh, go
Greg,
ahead.
I don't think that people reading American Quarterly as a result are less involved in civic organizations. To be clear on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the American Identity Project is addressing a whole host of issues, and one of them is how we teach civics education at the K through 12 level. And there's this unfortunate war between liberals and conservatives, where liberals are for, and the blue states are for, what's sometimes known as action civics or experiential learning, where young people go out and get involved in a local controversy. And then conservatives are for teaching the Federalist Papers and the Constitution. I think most thoughtful people think we need both, and that it's an unfortunate battle between those two. But to the extent that our civics education does not engage in enough experiential learning, I think that could translate into to lower levels of voter participation, for example. But I think the answer to this is to put guardrails around the civic, the experiential learning. So it's not as if, students get credit for going to, I don't know, a pro-choice rally or a Black Lives Matter rally, but rather that they get credit for changing their local conditions in some manner that's not particularly ideological, just showing that that in a democracy change is possible is an important lesson. And so I think that can ultimately translate into higher levels of voting.
I agree. I agree entirely. I think the blending of experiential learning with really important fundamental knowledge about our country's past and founding ideas is absolutely what every student, every person in this country needs.
Yeah, I just hop on that. I think the literature itself of civics shows that both are necessary. The foundational knowledge actually helps a lot of underserved communities. And then the experiential learning also is shown, I think, in the literature to work. So I think both are very important.
Excellent. We've got another question I want to get to before the time's up. It's this. The panel alluded earlier to attitudes from journals like American Quarterly seeping into the public consciousness through institutions like the education system, and cited opinion polls in support of this idea. Can you cite more concrete examples of this and similar phenomena? Do we have a more direct connection that we can talk about?
Well, I can say that there was a survey of historians, a survey of high school teachers who were teaching history, and it wasn't as loaded as at the K through 12, at the higher education level, where the syllabi were so slanted.
Yeah.
But 17% did assign the 1619 project, and I'm all for the 1619 project being read and debated, but the implication of this research was that this was data that was or a viewpoint that was presented by the faculty, and mainstream historians have fact-checked that effort and found it riddled with errors, and so I think that's problematic too. But more generally, if we have Gen Zers who see the founders as villains, I have to think that schools and colleges are where they're getting most of their information.
Gotcha. Is there a nexus between 1619 and American Quarterly, or is just sort of to Carolyn's point that there's a kind of a?
I'm making the analogy. I don't think we documented anything in our study that suggested that. I'm just saying there's a worldview which is overwhelmingly negative. I mean, to be clear, the 1619 project did not say, here's another pivot, important point in American history that tells us about America. If they'd said that, I'd say, of course, this is fundamental. It's an important piece of this story. They
Mhm.
said it's the founding of the country. Like the most distinctive thing you need to know about America
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
not the Declaration of Independence. It's not the Constitution. It's not the way the ideas in America helped shape liberal democracy in many, many other countries. It's that America is fundamentally racist. And I think what the problem was that, one does not have to exaggerate American racism. It's there. It's been there for centuries. It exists today. But that's what 1619 did. It exaggerated and said, for example, that the reason that we declared independence from England, a primary motive was to preserve slavery. And mainstream historians, including left of center historians, have thoroughly debunked that.
Got it. We're just about out of time. I want to give Carolyn the last word. By the way, extra credit to Carolyn for responding to Joseph's comment about New Mexico funding the 250th with civic education. Nice job.
Well,
Yeah.
so I guess my thought at the end of this really interesting discussion, I'm very appreciative of everyone's time and wisdom, is, I hope whatever else happens, that the number of readers of American Quarterly is boosted by this. So, I was looking here, print circulation is about 1,200. Historically estimated around 4,000 to 5,000 readers.
Mhm.
And so, look, I as an academic, I would love more non-academics to be reading these
Mhm.
publications. I think it's really important, and I think it's really important to fight with them too, right?
Mhm.
That's where the energy for change comes from. So I'm all in favor of all of it, and I really appreciate you both taking the journal so seriously.
Well, we could talk for another hour, but we're at time here. Thank you so much to everybody. Really fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot and had so much fun. Um, I hope there's a path back to all the things you've been saying about this. Hope that the folks who have joined us today will feel free to reach out to any of the three panelists. I'm sure you can find them by email on their websites, and continue the conversation and enjoy the 250th.
Yeah.
I'm gonna enjoy it now as a grizzled old man, not a middle schooler. Um, Thanks again. You guys have a great afternoon.